Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. And so, on we go. Interconnection, interplay, interface. The Flesh Interface series, posts 71 through 75, by 9 Mother, 9 Horse, 9 Eyes, 9. 71st post. To the new children of the forest. It's really difficult for me to tell a story with just words, so please bear with me. I'm trying to tell you the story of who I am and how I came to be this thing. But I have trouble organizing my thoughts into a single linear flow. I wish I could just show you the entire story all at once in all its many dimensions. Then I could make it clear why I hired someone to put a pellet of poison into my own arm. But as it is, I must use the ancient art of written narrative. So, here goes. Imagine spending your entire life cramped in a stinking prison cell, counting the days, scratching tally marks on the walls. Then, one day, that big iron door creaks open, and you're whisked off to a glamorous party full of beautiful people and delightful games, and everyone you meet is toasting you for being a genius, for being the great hope of the human race. That's what it's like to plug into the direct sense feeds after living at the children's home. I can't describe that first day in the feed realm. Though I've not cried in 24 years, I still get the ghostly feeling of tears coming to my eyes every time I think about it. To be looking around the home field environment, everything glittering in a new way, shining in colors that don't exist, all of it stretching out before me, all the main gateways open and waiting to be explored. The feeling of that moment of being a small child looking out at the beautiful new vastness of a new realm was the most magical thing that I've ever experienced. What I want to impress upon you is this. Every step I took towards slavery felt like a newfound freedom. At first, it was just games and social mixing with the other kids. We had all played the mysterious Children of the Forest game and scored highly on it. The game had been an entry exam of sorts. It turned out that I had scored higher than almost anyone else. A lot higher. This made some of the other kids jealous, but most of them seemed to look up to me. I'd never made anyone jealous before, and I had never been looked up to before. Social mixing and share streaming was easy and fun. You had time to think of what to say, which video or Annie to post to the stream, which paste to link up. It was so much more exciting than being in real life. I had a good memory and I could work on the assisted recall pretty well, so I made a lot of friends. They told us that we would all be going to Harvard and Stanford and Singfa, and we would be famous mixed stars and in with the government, that we were the future of the world. To be fair, they couldn't have known that most of us would be dead before we were 20. That all of us would be dead before 34, but they knew damn well that we wouldn't be going on to normal lives. We were part of an experiment. After we got used to the feed realm, they began the conditioning. I realize that you might not know what the feed realm is, so maybe I should explain a little about it. The feed realm is basically just another interface for sharing information and for carrying out transactions. It's based on the metaphor of 3D space. That's why they call it a realm. You can move through it. You can go up and down and left and right. It feels like swimming through weightlessness. They made it this way because that's how the human mind works. Our brains have evolved to exist in a 3D space. We naturally examine things as existing in a space, even abstract, non-spatial things. We think of the future as coming toward us, the past as receding behind us. Powerful people are considered above, and powerless people are below. Items belong in some categories, but outside of other categories. None of these spatial relationships really exist, but they're useful metaphors because our minds are suited to processing things in three-dimensional space. It's always been theoretically possible, even trivial, to create a four-dimensional or n-dimensional feed realm. But since the human mind isn't made to process so many dimensions, it was considered pointless. But recently, a genetic mutation dating back to the Stone Age was discovered, which allows certain individuals to experience and comprehend feed realms of 4 and higher spatial dimensions. While this mutation may have been useless for Stone Age people living in a spatially 3D world, it was also harmless, so it somehow survived. Though its initial origin, that is something of a mystery. Anyways, now scientists were able to hook people up to 4D feed realms. Early test subjects described the experience in terms ranging from nauseating to utterly horrifying. It was theorized that maybe, if children were conditioned from a young age to exist in a higher dimensional environment, that they would become accustomed to it. But such conditioning was, of course, deemed unethical. Enter the CIA. Their motto: where ethical approbation ends, our work begins. They used their global genetic database to identify children with the genotype and collected a group of them to begin conditioning. And that brings us back to my story. See? Spatial metaphor. At first, we were just playing around in the feed realm, getting used to it. Then, they started the conditioning. How do I describe higher dimensional space, so-called hyperspace? Nauseating and utterly horrifying are exactly what it felt like at first. Everybody hated it. We cried and tried to run away when they made us go into the hyper realm. But of course, there was nowhere to run. We were all lying in hygiene beds, where most of us would lie until we died. They forced us to come back into the hyper realm a little at a time, just showing us simple shapes at first to acclimate us. But how do I describe it? It was like watching things pass through each other, but without touching each other or covering each other up, in ways that made the brain go, "God, that's impossible! Stop it!" There were plain gray boxes and cones and infinite places and bottomless abysses, and the shapes would move slowly along and do things that were simply impossible. Some of the kids never got used to it. They hated it and dropped out of the program and disappeared from the feed realm. But I kept going. Just like in the Children of the Forest game. I got used to 4 dimensions, and then 5, and 6. I was a leader. I taught the other kids tricks and how to understand what they were seeing. It was cool, being in hyperspace, seeing everything at once like that. Was hyperspace mind-bending? Sure. But not nearly as mind-bending as hyper-time. And not nearly as horrifying. 70-second post. Nobody cared until it came to swallow up all the little white children. A friend from rehab invites me to an HA meeting. Shooting boy was never among my vices, but I go with him. Meetings in the suburbs, and it is packed. Every bit of floor space is filled with folding chairs, and every chair is filled. I want to leave as soon as I sit down. It's like being in a crowded elevator for an entire hour. I can feel the coffee breath on my skin. It's disturbing to look around at all the kids in the room. How are they all so young and fresh? How are they all so young and fresh-faced? The alcoholics tend to be much more beat up. All those years of excess capillary dilation give our faces a meaty quality. These little heroin addicts, on the other hand, well, they come into the room at 19 with the glow of childhood still on their skin. My friend's arms have no track marks. They're smooth and dull like no major veins left. He's 21. I've been roommates with kids like these for the past few months. They don't know who Norm from Cheers is. They don't know how to empty a dryer filter or take care of a Teflon pan, but they know very well how to cook up black tar. And they definitely know how to find veins. It quickly becomes apparent that one of the meeting's regulars died last night. Everybody's upset. People start crying. My desire not to be there grows exponentially. I didn't know the kid. I feel like I stumbled into the wrong funeral. The kid's sponsor steps forward, starts talking. He's an older man with a gray goatee. He was guiding the kid through the steps. The room looks at him to say something comforting, something with the ring of authority and wisdom. The room is full of children in the grips of a problem that their parents can't understand. Here is a grown-up who can understand. He talks about meeting the kid's parents at the hospital. His eyes grow damp, and he recalls haltingly that the parents were very polite. They thanked him very politely for trying to help their son. Then he looks down at the floor. There's no more to say. Later, I recall this story to my roommate, Sean. He says that this has been going on with the blacks for years, but nobody cared until it came to swallow up all the little white children. He says that most problems come to visit black people first because black people are God's chosen people. They must be chastised. The program tells us to be more open-minded and less judgmental. I am trying to be more open-minded and less judgmental about Sean's beliefs. At first glance, his beliefs are paranoid, ahistorical, conspiracy theory hogwash. At second glance, they are appallingly anti-Semitic cultural appropriation. But my sponsor says it's not my place to enlighten him. I only need to be a decent roommate. When the Jews were sold into captivity, their narrative survived. This was not so for the slaves of America. At least, nothing like the Torah was passed on. The system of slavery worked to destroy the history of millions of people. But I wonder, how much of the Jews' history really survived? There are certain parts of the Torah that don't have the resounding ring of authority and wisdom, e.g. the talking snake, or the burning bush, or the Nephilim, or 90% of everything else. How much of that real story actually survived? It must be tempting to place oneself into the context of a mythical narrative that goes back thousands of years, that extends forward to the end of history. Instead of just being this lost little individual, you become the inheritor of a spiritual legacy, part of a grand struggle, one of the chosen people. A new roommate moved into the house a few days ago. His name is Donnie. He's in his mid-40s. And he's a former Marine. I show him the Iwo Jima segment of my story, and I ask him what he thinks. 73rd post. A lifetime of spiritual failure. I used to drop mucho acid and believe in God. Then I became an alcoholic. Now, I don't know what the fuck is going on. When I was a kid in high school, I liked dropping acid. One of my favorite books was The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which tells the real-life story of a band of early acid heads and proto-hippies called the Merry Pranksters, who invented a lot of what would become the tropes of the 1960s, such as dressing up in weird shit and riding around on a painted bus while stoned on drugs. I was especially intrigued by an experiment which was carried out by the pranksters in 1965. One day, a few of the pranksters put a sign on the front gate of the group's compound that read, "The Merry Pranksters welcome the Beatles." At the time, the Beatles were the biggest band in the world, and the Merry Pranksters were largely unknown. Moreover, none of the pranksters actually knew the Beatles or had any idea of how to contact the Beatles, nor did they make any attempt to do so. For that band to show up at their house in California was extremely unlikely. Now, despite all this, the pranksters put this crazy banner out on their front gate, and they fully expected the Beatles to show up. To understand the pranksters' behavior, you must understand the effects of LSD. This is true in a general sense and with specific regard to this banner. You see, sometimes when you take LSD, something strange happens, something beyond all the weird hallucinations and the thought distortions. Sometimes you get the eerie feeling that coincidences are happening all around you. You might be listening to music while watching television and notice that the pictures and the sound seem to sync up. You might open a book and notice that the opening passage has an odd, unmistakable relevance to the current moment that you are in. At times, you almost feel like you're conscious of things before they actually happen. You imagine your friend walking through the door, and a moment later, she does. You look at your phone, and a moment later it rings. Sometimes these coincidences pile up so quickly that you get the gut feeling there's something behind it all. That all the seemingly disparate and unrelated phenomena of your life are actually part of an underlying order or pattern or structure which is normally hidden. This order seems to be a cosmic phenomenon that pervades and controls all of existence, something which has always existed, but which you have been blind to until just now, taking that hit. The existence of this fundamental order comes as a revelation because it is completely different from the ordinary mechanism of cause and effect that you're used to, that science uses to explain things. This feeling, to me, is the essence of the LSD experience. LSD leads to a sudden awareness of the meaningful coincidences, which in turn gives rise to an awareness of an underlying cosmic order, which is acausal. The acausal part is important. A true coincidence is when two things happen, which are clearly related, but which cannot be possibly related by cause and effect. For example, let's say you're watching a show on television about zebras. Then you walk out your front door and you see a zebra trotting down the sidewalk, dropping zebra shit all over the place. The two events have an obvious connection, but it's hard to imagine how that connection could occur through cause and effect. It's not likely that your TV viewing choices caused that zebra to escape from the zoo, nor is it likely that the two events have a common cause, unless somebody's playing an elaborate prank on you. Such a coincidence could be considered meaningful if you believe that it is evidence of the aforementioned underlying order. Otherwise, it's just some weird shit that happened randomly. During my high school years, because of my little LSD hobby, I became obsessed with meaningful coincidences. I was always looking for little signs from the cosmos and hidden connections between things which weren't really causally related. I tried to predict things. I looked for symbols and tried to fit the events of my daily life into cosmic patterns. I got into Nostradamus and the I Ching and Stychomancy, all that sort of shit. Unfortunately, my attempts to ascertain the underlying structure of the cosmos were heavily clouded by my own immature narcissism. You'll notice that people who believe in past lives tend to see themselves as great figures of the past, like Caesar and Van Gogh, rather than the anonymous turnip pickers and fishwives who actually populated most of history. Similarly, I was convinced that the cosmos was sending me indications of my impending greatness rather than portending my eventual descent into alcoholic mediocrity. Yes, it was revealing to me that the world would end soon, and I would be a Christ-like figure of greatness in the coming apocalypse. I shit you not, I really believed this stuff. Luckily, blogs had not been made popular yet. Then, I took my final acid trip. It was a bad trip. I don't want to get into any details, but let's just say that I saw some shit and I never wanted to take acid again. All my life, I'd been hoping to be visited with this grand revelation, and now I just hope that I was never visited by another one. It filled my head with all this crazy shit. Not truth, just madness. I decided that whatever was underlying the cosmos could stay lying under the goddamn cosmos. I wanted no part of it. I guess I should tell you what happened with the Beatles banner. In putting out that banner, the pranksters had hoped that one day they could tap into the underlying acausal order of the universe by simply welcoming the Beatles, rather than by reaching out to the band or pursuing them. But the Beatles never showed up. At least, they never showed up in a literal sense. A couple of years later, the Beatles released the Magical Mystery Tour, in which they all dressed up in weird shit and rode around on a painted bus while stoned on drugs, precisely as the pranksters had done. So, in a sense, they did come to the pranksters. Of course, this can all be explained by ordinary cause and effect. The pranksters helped popularize a social movement which eventually spread to England and infected the Beatles. Or you can invoke a mystical explanation saying that the pranksters somehow sensed that the underlying pattern of the cosmos would bring the Beatles around to their way of doing things. After I stopped doing LSD, I started leaning away from notions of cosmic patterns, and I became more convinced that any understanding of the universe would have to rely on cause and effect. My earlier attempts at mysticism began to look like embarrassing folly. I came to regard all that meaningful coincidence stuff as bullshit. I figured that LSD just overstimulated whatever sort of coincidence detector might exist in the brain. You could dress it up in a fancy word like synchronicity and give it the imprimatur of Carl Jung or whoever, but it was nothing more than magical thinking, as old and stupid as Stone Age tribes. I'd been perceiving connections between things where none existed. There are no meaningful coincidences. A coincidence is only meaningful if you can find a causal relationship between the two phenomena, and if you can, it's no longer a true coincidence. The universe doesn't send people signs through the I Ching or Nostradamus or any of that silly shit. There are rain clouds in the sky, it's a sign you should carry an umbrella. That's an actual sign from the universe. The other stuff, that's just crap. It was with this mindset that I entered AA years later. You see, AA is a God-centered program. The main idea is that you can get sober if you live according to God's will instead of your own. People in AA often talk about watching for signs from God, or listening to instructions from God, and so forth, as you can imagine I was less than impressed. I was appalled. I felt like I was being dragged back into this narcissistic, mystical bullshit that I had thankfully left behind. I felt like I was being asked to roll back my little personal age of enlightenment and go back to the Dark Ages. Fuck that. I wasn't gonna do it. One night at a meeting, after several months of listening to this spirituality shit, I made my feelings clear. I told them that this spirituality was the hugest load of horseshit ever foisted upon human culture. Spirituality, I opined, was like a thought virus that gets passed from one person to another. It was basically gonorrhea of the brain. And AA was one of the biggest fucking disease vectors I'd ever seen. I told them that they should be ashamed of themselves for preying on people who are in a vulnerable state just to convert them to their bullshit spiritual beliefs. Rather than the stunned silence that is the dream of every r/atheism subscriber, they just told me to keep coming back and moved on to the next guy. Turns out that little rants like this are they're a semi-regular occurrence. Having no other good options, I kept coming back. I asked a lot of people why they believed in God. They almost invariably brought up meaningful coincidences or magical signs. I became more convinced than ever that it was all bullshit. I argued a lot with one guy in particular. In recovery, you meet a lot of people who are like Ned Flanders, with tattoos. People who lived dirty and then cleaned up and became extra square, but they still have their tattoos. This was one of those guys. He told me a story about how he'd been in prison at the end of his rope, and he prayed to God to send him a sign. And just then, a little bird alighted on his prison window and sang him a beautiful little song. God, he knew at that moment, was real. I almost dislocated my eyes, they rolled so hard. What a bunch of silly shit. How could a grown adult believe in this crap? I read the AA literature mainly to bolster my arguments against the program. AA literature is very sneaky. It knows that most atheists follow the tradition of Western secular humanism, which values open-mindedness in the contrast to the closed-mindedness of religionists. So the literature portrays atheism as closed-minded. Atheists are encouraged to be more open-minded, more flexible, more willing to accept the idea that they don't know everything about the universe. I wondered if it was fucking opposite day. How were these spiritual nutcases gonna portray spirituality as open-mindedness and atheism as closed-mindedness? I was simply asserting that in my entire life I'd never seen any convincing evidence of God. That wasn't closed-mindedness. That wasn't presumptuous. That was the opposite. I was willing to accept the evidence presented to me by the world, unlike religionists who turned a blind eye to it. I told heavy metal Ned Flanders that if the skies ever opened up to show me the majestic glory of God, then I'd be happy to fall to my knees, because either God existed or I was in the presence of technology advanced enough to be godlike. I told him that I was perfectly willing to believe in God if I was ever presented with a shred of credible evidence for his existence. Soon after, I was presented with precisely that. Who knows? Maybe it was a coincidence. 74th post. Let's play with our audience, aka how I opened your mind's eye to the meta-narrative around you. I think it's possible it could only be written on the fly. The story gives the appearance of vast scope because the storylines are from different eras and areas, but rather than a broad panorama, it only provides thin slivers of insight into each time and place. Everything in between those slivers is left to the player's imagination. And given the author's hints and branching timelines, he or she is not even necessarily required to think these little slivers. He or she is not even necessarily required to link these little slivers together. People also point to the various stories' interconnectedness and claim that the work has a structure too intricate to be improvisational. But how much interconnectedness is there really? For example, the Stone Age story has cats in it, and the cat story has cats in it, obviously. This is a point of similarity, again, obviously. But what is the significance? So what if both stories have cats? Is this meaningful coincidence or a meaningless one? The same question could be asked about the Children of the Forest, or the various Marines, or the demon penises for which the author seems to have such fondness. Yes, these elements recur, but to what end? Like somebody on LSD undergoing a false revelation, we are drawing connections where none really exist. Perhaps these are meaningless coincidences. The story employs a number of callbacks where it makes reference to something which was not mentioned in quite a while. This gives the appearance of careful pre-planning, but callbacks are actually pretty easy to improvise. The author can just look over the story, pick an element, and bring it back into the fore again, like a prime factorization problem. The problem is easier to create than it is to solve. A successful callback is really more of a testament to the reader's intelligence than to the author's. And by the way, what happened to Companion 12? That seemed like it was going to be a thing. But, yeah, anyways, this is all speculation on my part. It's an interesting question. How can we know whether the story is improvised or not? The author does occasionally make direct responses to other Reddit comments and makes reference to current events, but as you said, this could just be a sort of superficial improvisation where most of the story is actually fixed, but a few of the details are improvised. The author could also be combing through Reddit for the right comment to give the appearance of improvisation. Are we watching real choices in action? Or are the events in this universe occurring along some deterministic path? Is there really any way to find out? Maybe some sort of test should be devised, but that would require the author to play along. 75th post. Back to the 80s, aka I really wanted to be Brooke Shields when I was 15. Okay, now I'm in my bedroom, and the bedroom smells like bedroom. Actual bedroom. Oh, definite. It smells like wood and blankets and stuff. Sharp. I wonder how they decide on the bedroom smell. I move my arms and bounce a little on the bed springs. My body feels really natural and comfortable. Everything looks sharp, too. There are no weird color trails like in Acclimation. Cool. Really crisp. I stand up and take in all the little touches. It's an attic bedroom with a slanting ceiling and wood panel walls. Night outside the window, mood lighting from a nightstand lamp. Clothes and skateboard and other little random teenage stuff scattered on the floor. Walls covered in posters. In excess. The Cure, Michael Jackson in a yellow vest. Very definite. Or should I say groovy? Did they say that in the 80s? An interrupt comes through. Atlanta completely destroyed in full scale. I use my illegal bypass to cut off all interrupts. Ugh. I hate interrupts. I'll have to figure out how to change that setting. I notice a small can of Pepsi Free sitting on my nightstand. I pick it up, still cold. I crack it open and smell it, and the fizz tickles my nose. It really smells like soda. I take a sip. Wow. Oh. Not very good. Maybe it's a low quality render, or maybe I just don't like Pepsi Free. Still, it's pretty amazing to be tasting something in a feed. This was really worth it. The doorbell rings somewhere downstairs. Oh, definitely, we're starting. I head toward the door and catch myself in the mirror. I'm supposed to look like a girl named Brooke Shields at 18 years old. Wow, she's pretty. What a render. Eyebrows are a little intense, though. I consider toning them down, but I don't want to get caught up in character design. If you change one thing, you end up changing 50 things, and it just goes on forever. I head out into the hallway and pause for a moment. The smell just changed. Now, there's a hallway smell, carpet, and drywall. I laugh. I take a step back into the bedroom, and the bedroom smell returns instantly. I step into the hallway again. Hallway smell, bedroom smell, hallway smell, bedroom smell. I snicker at this. The smell changes, just like that. Why can't they make it more natural? It's kind of a giveaway. Oh well. I head downstairs. The furniture in the front hall looks really cheesy. I pick up a lamp and toss it at the wall. It smashes apart and the bulb explodes with a spark. I look at the shards. There's actually bits of powder and all sorts of little details. Yow. Very, very certain. Undo that, I say, and the lamp fades away and reappears on the side table. I open the front door. A guy stands there with swept back blonde hair and a baggy red and black jacket with the collar popped up and the sleeves rolled up. Nice. He gives me a killer smile and says, "Hey babe, what took you so long?" A blast of electric guitar hits me and the guy floats up and out over the front lawn, becoming 2 stories tall and striking a sexy pose. Colors fill the night, sparkling starlight showers him, and a synth beat kicks in. An announcer shouts, "Corey Lancer, high school hotshot and rock and roll renegade. He's a fast talker with a slick attitude, a guy who can make anything happen. All the girls want him, but all he wants is one thing, the Ferrari 288 GTO. A red sports car comes flying out of the sky and does crazy circles around Corey while he strikes more sexy poses and the music thumps. It's the fastest street-legal car in existence, only 272 produced. This is Corey's dream, Corey's obsession, Corey's life. He'll do anything to get one, and he needs your help. Can you get the car? Can you win his heart? Are you ready for 80s turbo ascension?" Shit. I should have looked into the summary closer. I'm not really into cars. This doesn't really seem like a very interesting narrative. Still, Corey is really well rendered. Blonde hair, blue eyes, bit of mischief in the smile. I like it. I wonder if he'll be controlled by an AI or a Filipino. He floats back down to me and returns to his normal size. "So, what's up?" he says with a devilish little grin. "Wow, this is A stuff." "Just doing my hair," I say, flicking a huge brown mane off my shoulder. This Brooke Shields lady has an absurd amount of hair." "You chicks," Corey says, leaning forward and giving me a kiss. His mouth tastes like bubble gum. The kiss feels perfect. Yeah, just definitely. I feel Corey's chest through his shirt. Skinny, but nice. I think about toning him up a bit. Nah, better to just go with the default settings. "So listen, there's this race at the Speed Max track," Corey says in his cute California accent. "The Crystal Cobras put out a challenge. They're taking all comers. The prize is, I don't really like racing." Corey thinks for a moment. It's a character animation. He looks cute thinking, his sharp eyebrows pressed together. Now he's taking too long, and it's getting awkward. I think he's controlled by a Filipino, or maybe there's lag. He snaps back into action instantly. Okay, listen. There's going to be a dance-off at the club Heatwave. The Crystal Cobras put out a challenge and they're taking all comers. The prize is $100,000. Dancing. Yeah, that would be one way to try out the body. Sounds groovy, I say. But I can't help but think of another way to give the body a test drive. I slip my hand down into my tight purple skirt and feel my pussy. Oh, yeeks. They really have everything working down there. Should I do it already? Just 5 minutes into the narrative? Oh, why not? Everybody does it right away. Corey looks really good. Wonder what kind of cock they rendered him with. But no, I should go at least a half an hour without slutting it up. Dancing will be fun. Corey holds out his arm like a gentleman, and I take it. He leads me down the front walk towards his car, a smeary old junk ride with dents and rust all over it. Sorry, hon. It's only temporary, Corey says as we come up on the car. I promise you, by the end of this week, I'm going to have a Ferrari 288 GTO, the fastest street-legal car in the world. It's my dream. It's my obsession. I'll do anything but I'm not listening. There's something in the bushes by the road. I wonder if this is actually one of those fake-out horror narratives. I really hate scary stuff. I bend over and look into the bushes. A pair of shining eyes are staring back at me. Oh, what the hell? There's an old naked lady hiding in the bushes. Yeah, I like this story because it plays pretty heavily with perception. I have a real thing with perception. Stay scary, my wildlings. Get used to the default before you mess with the settings, and make the most of your nights.